I'll move it down. Okay.
So welcome. There are 8 of us present. There's a quorum present, so I will call this meeting to order. Today is our special budget meeting. The documents you have in front of you are pretty much all you'll need for this meeting, in addition to the PowerPoint which Andrea is going to present. So when we do the PowerPoint, those of us who want to see better can move to chairs up in the room. And before I turn it over to Andrea, well, first, is there any public comment?
There was no public comment.
Okay. I'll just briefly talk about the timeline for passing our budget. Today is just informational. So we're going to hear a presentation from Andrea, and then it's our chance to ask as many questions from Andrea and Adam that we have about the budget, and just get as comfortable as possible with the materials that are being presented with votes that we need to take to approve our budget. In board docs, there's 2 resolutions attached to the agenda item for today. Those are draft resolutions of what we will pass in March. There's the tax levy and the tax cap override. And Bob, I don't know if now is the best time, but would you explain why we do the tax cap override resolution, even though our budget is not an override budget?
Absolutely. So this is one of those things that is legal advice and a best practice to protect yourself from a potential error in a piece of data that we've gotten with respect to the calculation turns out to be incorrect. What happens is if you pass a budget that actually goes over the tax cap for the year in which it applies, and you haven't passed an override resolution, then you're going to be required by the Office of State Controller to take any money in excess of whatever the actual cap is that year, segregate it, and use it in future years to offset levy. The override resolution would protect you from having to do that. Because you're a part of the local government, the override resolution only needs to be passed by this board. It doesn't require a supermajority of the voters to pass a budget that has been overridden. And so what the library legal community has recommended to libraries since the tax cap went in is even in years where you don't intend to go over, passing the resolution is a good protective factor. It's particularly important in a year like this where you've got a high number and you're using some carryover, just in case one of the pieces of the data that goes into the calculation were incorrect. This will protect you from that issue. Now, obviously, if that occurred and you decided that that wasn't my intention, you don't want to use this money, you can always sort of segregate it and use it for that purpose anyway. But this would protect you not having a choice. And that's why we suggest that you do it. It does need to get passed by a supermajority of their trustees. And next month we can talk about what that process is.
Are there any questions on that? I know that's a very technical thing to start off with, but we'll also have next month to talk about that. And I want to stress for now that even though that's called the override resolution, the budget that Andrea is about to present is within the tax cap. This is not an override proposal. With that, if there are questions, I'll take them, but then I will turn it over to Andrea.
Okay, so you have 2 documents in front of you. One is the tax impact of the proposed FY24 increases, and the second document is the proposal with the 2% increase and the 4.58% increase there on the far right. We also have on page 2 a budget table P, and those numbers correlate to the numbers listed on the front page. So it's just a helpful guide in case you want to look at this later and have questions about what lines relate to what. The third page is basically presents the difference between the proposed budget and the approved budget for fiscal 23, based on, and the proposed budget is based on the 4.58%. And actually, I'm going to hand it over to Adam Stump to take us through some of the proposed changes at this point. So,
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to keep it fairly brief here and just make a few clarifying points on most significant changes here. I went through the budget line by line at the committee meeting. I want to do that here. There's been questions about specific lines, which we can address that later. So if you look at the third page of comparison to the prior year, you can see there were at least minor changes applied to almost every line. Certainly a few lines stick out and having more significant changes. Sarah noted a couple of those in her email that applied to full-time salaries, the utilities, of course, is another big one that we're talking about. Notably, this year, the retirement system estimate is 95,000, much more than prior. You'll also see that we increased revenue by other revenue, I should say, by almost 49,000. The majority of that is content reorg was previously not classified as revenue. We are on the advice of our auditors reporting as revenue this coming year. And so that increase to the U.S. state grant line, you see that actually directly corresponds with the increase you're seeing in the digital content expense line under materials and services. Several other lines that I've seen fairly significant changes between last year and this year. Professional services. One that's highly dependent on and IT services as well. You'll also notice that we have 4 lines on that significant cost tab. They are not a part of our current fiscal 24 proposal. Those include North Alton services, which we haven't paid anything towards that line years now. Construction grant expense. Those expenses, you'll see those are reflected in the capital fund accounting, going forward, not on the operating fund. And so that central book data has also been removed. UHLS has consolidated the central library funding into one branch, the central library services aid. And so that's what you see in fiscal 24. Community relations as well. That line has been fairly underused in the last couple of years, and we feel that the sort of items that have been booked there recently could easily be absorbed in other areas of the budget that are probably too much. So we have decided to remove that line. And then just briefly, I'll just touch on the tax impact documentation. We can maybe also touch on this as well. But, 50% just to make it clear what the real impact of a 4.58% increase would be on the average taxpayer. Represent the average taxpayer would be used to see there. So that 4.58% increase would represent a increase of $11.16 to that average taxpayer over the course of the year. And that's a total tax of $254.70 for the year. So that one way of looking at that is that your total tax for that taxpayer comes out to about 70 cents a day, $4.89 a day, $21.25 a month. So I think it's just a bit of a keep in mind what this 4.58% increase actually is. And so if there are any questions, maybe we can address that at the end of the presentation. Now I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, and I also want to make a quick note about that North Albany line, the 19,200 that was, that doesn't appear. That may be invoked by the lease agreement that we have with them, but we haven't heard anything about renewing that lease agreement. So we do have funds to cover that if the need arises, but I just want to explain what that relates to. Sarah?
So I actually was wondering about that. So that is the lease for the property, which I suppose is the school district or the YMCA. That it's for the lease for the newly reopened library.
Correct, but the space has changed slightly, so we might need to actually review that lease. I'm not totally sure.
So, with it being listed as 0, does that mean that the school district is currently letting the library use the space?
That's exactly right.
You negotiated the lease, have to be negotiated as part of the deal. And so you've got a lease that's in effect, and I think that there's been an amendment that's been called in place. 19.2, I think, is the old common area charges back from the old arrangement. That replacement, but I don't think that there's a relationship to what they meant to do. And that lease was for a 5-year term starting in October 2020, but I think it was informally agreed that there was no point on starting to charge rent or have the lease take effect until we took that place.
So what was the controversy from when the initially, I remember some time ago that the library wasn't supposed to be paying rent or was or wasn't. So what all happened with that? I guess I can go back and look at the.
No, I'll give you a quick summary. So many years ago, 20 years ago, maybe, when Hope 6 was done, the apartments up on Jennings Drive, there was money that was associated with the YMCA facility as well. There was a city grant that the housing authority, the YMCA, and the library all participated in. The deal was that there was going to be a library space in there to fill one of the aspects of the grant obligation that the housing authority did not have. It was supposed to be rented, but there was always an agreement that the library would contribute to the costs of that space. And so ultimately, there was a big dispute about whether there would be or wouldn't be rent between the Y and the library. The library said, we're willing to pay common area charges. It was ultimately got calculated to be somewhere around $19,000 a year. The library always took the position that there had to be rent-free on the grant. That was always the terms. Ultimately, the YMCA laughed, as you know, sold it to the school district. And so when the school district came in, they said, you know, we want you to stay. We'd like to invest money, now see the benefits of the investment, but they always needed and wanted a lease. And there was always going to be a lease. We negotiated that lease during the summer of 2020, as the project was getting designed, so that the bond council knew that there would be a lease in place once we occupied the space. But I believe that there was an informal agreement between Scott and I don't remember if it was the most recent superintendent or the superintendent before that to essentially hold the lease payments in advance until the time.
So if we rewind to the beginning where we weren't supposed to be paying the rent, but we were, there's no retroactive, like reimbursement of what we
Yeah,
paid.
library never paid rental money to the line. What it ultimately agreed to just sort of settle the issue was to share some of the expenses.
So what was on the previous budget, it said rent,
That's exactly. So
and then,
you
but
had
then it
that
had
other-
utilities and things like that,
And
so.
that's what it was common use. And that was a big issue is because the line and said, well, you call it rent on that. That's just. It's common use charges. I don't remember what all of the components were. I don't know how much remember, but it was things like janitorial services, utilities, not so much electricity, but heating, hot water for the space, things like that. There's still a common area charge in the lease now. It's just much lower.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I had a question about community relations and someone fix what that entails. Yeah, I knew that was going to catch eyes because it obviously like crossing a line through community relations on the part of a public library, traffic are not great. The fact is that it's such a small fraction of what we actually devote to community relations, community programming, so forth. Adam, can you speak to some of the charges that did go against that line? And
I mean, one that sticks out, we bought shirts for our CD students. So an expense like that, we could easily put it under office and library supplies. Other expenses in the past have dealt with sort of events, building programming. And
Yeah.
lately, I mean, it just is a line that does not get used often. So the few things that have gotten booked there, we use them under other.
it was
Certainly
turning
not to
into,
say we're, reducing on, outreach. Services, right?
Go ahead, I'll let you finish.
it was becoming a little bit of a miscellaneous line for some of the things that I would describe. The shirts for the community engagement clerks are really, and those are shirts for staff. They really are more appropriately out of the supply line anyway.
So in reference to our goals for the community plan and having a specific category dedicated to, community relation, wouldn't it be beneficial to utilize a category that's specifically related to community relation to help us meet our goals for strategic plan? Why get rid of the line if there's already a portion designated for that sort of a thing?
Because we have a services, if you look under the materials and services section, the programming section, a line in that section is 75,000. And that is actually one of the lines that relates to how we support programming for the community. It's so much part of what we do that, yeah, it's within that line.
So I guess my question is, I understand that certain programming will fulfill a DEI kind of, strategic plan. I get that, it could fall under different categories. But I guess my question is, community relations is put in there separate from the initiative and programming and things that are already being done as a separate item. So it being its own separate item seems to me that it's a specific purpose there in reference to community relations, aside from the normal outreach and programming that we're doing.
If our goal was to show, well, first of all, to your point, anytime we're reporting out about our strategic plan goals and how we're achieving them, that would come in the form of the quarterly report for the strategic plan. And you will see the progress that we made toward that goal in those quarterly reports.
As you mentioned, there's a specific Okay, we're talking about just the line, specifically community relations, right? It was there for a reason aside from other budget lines. Of course, you're gonna have programming that's gonna be dedicated to, outreach, that's part of the reason when everything. Community relations is a separate line, but they're specifically for, what would fall in that category. To me, would seem to be a little bit different, or there's a purpose that community relations is so there as a separate line to be utilized specifically for community relations.
I hear you, and I knew this was gonna be a tricky line to discuss. But it's only $5,000, and it actually goes back to, and I'm not saying that that's not an insignificant amount at all. I'm saying that, as Adam said, the needs that we have that relate to community relations are covered by other lines in the budget.
Yeah, I'm sure at some point back in time, that was the thing, that community relations was somehow different than the other budget lines. It sounds like what Adam is saying is that we haven't been spending.
I understand what you think. I think there's a misunderstanding of what I'm, so we can leave it at that. We can move on to.
I actually have a different question. So I get it. It sounds like Adam was saying that we all that line can be covered in different areas, and the example that's thrown out is programming. But I'm just looking at the numbers, and from a number standpoint, it looks like programming is being decreased by 4,000. And we're saying that the 5,000 from human relations is coming out of there as well. So then that looks like programming is really being decreased by $9,000.
I can speak to that a little bit. Yeah, the $4,000 decrease. So $4,000 was actually tacked on to the program budget last year for centennial program. It was especially set aside for that. That was the intent. So 75,000 was sort of the base program budget. So I think the reverting it back to 75,000, it's just getting back to its baseline. It's not cutting the budget.
So that's saying it's 75,000, or it's 70,000 plus the 5,000 from community relations. So it's 75,000. Is that 5,000? Is that
No, the 5,000 would be. I mean, it's sort of being informally absorbed by various other. I mean, the sorts of things that have been getting booked to community relations. It's not even $5,000, say, in the last year or two. So. But no, the $75,000 in the program would not factor in $5,000. That's not easy.
Adam, you said for our next meeting, or can you send out an email, what was paid for out of the $5,000 that I put from?
Yeah, I mean, I could come up with some more than that. Certainly like to put that in there.
Thank you.
Oh, I have a crazy question. I'm so sorry. Full-time salaries are going up, but the benefits are compared to staying the same. But aren't benefits going out as a portion of, so your compensation and benefits, your benefits is really a portion of your salary based on.
So the employee benefits line that covers health insurance, the average workers' comp, and disability insurance primarily. The salaries, we had to increase a bit more, in part, primarily really because of the last raise that we had would be contracts. So while salaries are increasing, health insurance costs, things like that, isn't increasing our widows. And looking at our employee benefits, totals over the last couple of years, we did, that number we mentioned that would be.
So the percentage that the library pays out of the employee, so the employer share of health insurance is not cheap.
Right, and actually, if any, I mean, this will depend on the next contract negotiation, I'm sure.
And somewhere in the negotiation now.
Not yet, but it's.
We haven't started.
Oh, I'm like, oh, we didn't have to do the negotiation.
But actually, if anything, as employee salaries go up, they have to cover more of their insurance costs.
Right, but and it's, I'm just thinking with another aspect. If I'm in a union and I'm negotiating and I know my salary is going up, I'm going to try to bargain that my contributory share as an employee goes down and stays the same. So if my contributory share as an employee stays the same, and health insurance goes up every year, the amount that's charged to employers as a whole by the insurance companies goes up every year. And it stands to reason, I'm going to argue with as an employee that my contributory share stay the same, since somebody has to go up. So the employer's fortune has to go up. I'm just looking at it like that. I'm not, I get what you're saying.
It's certainly a possibility. I mean, there's definitely a lot of variables that go along with the negotiation. And, there may be some result of that negotiation that we'll have to address during the budget modification. We do have a plan for that.
Okay, any further questions for Adam before we move on?
Okay, first I want to thank Adam, and I want to thank my team for all their work in helping me see this budget and prepare it and understand it. As we did prepare the budget presentation or recommendation, it was really helpful to put it in the context of the strategic plan. So that's kind of what I want to add to this whole overall presentation, is that context with the ultimate goal of providing you, the board, with all the data you need to make an informed vote. So we have 4 major strategic plan goals, as you know: community engagement, diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, workforce, and sustainability. And while our strategic plan isn't a flowchart or hierarchical, as this image kind of sort of suggests, when you look at the budget forces that are currently at work and consider what it's going to take to make progress on this plan, you see that the workforce and sustainability goals are foundational and interdependent, interdependent, and that both of these foundational goals are directly tied into our budget. Our community engagement goal and our DEIA goal conversely rely on our workforce. Both goals call on us to dedicate more staff time to outreach, programming, services, collection development, and intentional recruitment. And that's not to say that we won't also be devoting other kinds of resources to the community engagement and DEIA goal, but workforce is a big part of it. Right now, we're in that vicious cycle of attrition through resignations and retirements, and there are underlying reasons for that attrition that the workforce objectives are meant to address. And as a reminder, the workforce objectives are establish competitive salaries for incumbent and future employees through contract negotiations, develop recruitment strategies to increase diversity among staff, and develop a process to evaluate staff engagement and job satisfaction to improve retention. So the rest of this presentation is going to focus on those foundational goals of workforce and sustainability, with more of a focus on fiscal sustainability. We'll start by looking at the workforce goal. So this graph shows staff resignations and retirements of temporary, part-time, and full-time staff over the past 6 years, and also shows our fiscal year-to-date resignations and retirements over the first 7 months of this fiscal year. As you can see, we have higher levels of attrition last year and this year, with this year's levels set to exceed last year's if the current trend continues. And particularly notable is the number of full-time staff who left the organization in FY22, which was the first full year of regular service since the pandemic began. So this was part of what this level of resignations and retirements is part of what prompted us to do the community engagement survey that we conducted at the end of calendar year 2022. So following that strategic plan workforce objective to develop a process to evaluate staff engagement and job satisfaction, we set up and conducted this survey. And I know that this board recognizes that safety concerns among staff are prevalent and that you share those concerns. I want to note that just this month, we issued 5 loss of library privileges letters, which is the most severe action we can take to keep the library safe. It's basically a letter that I sign and approve that states that someone can't come back to the library for 3 or 6 months. Anyway, it's very unusual to issue 5 in a single month, and we don't take them lightly. And I cite that as one example of kind of where we're at with safety risks that come up in the library space. We're not going to solve all of the community's problems single-handedly as the library, but there are things that we can be doing as an organization and best practices to put in place that really mitigate the risks in the library. And these practices, which involve having a trained workforce, are not helped by our staffing challenges and the high turnover. That said, on the bright side, why do people stay? They really appreciate their fellow team members. They really take pride in public library mission and work. And that's something that is worth pausing on because it's a critical part of what makes us a great team. And it really generates a lot of potential for the future. So non-competitive salaries was another topic that surfaced in the staff engagement survey. And this obviously goes directly to our workforce objective. This particular little graph is from an MIT living wage model that they produced for specific localities or geographic locations, I should say. It's a market-based approach that draws on geographically specific expenditure data related to families' likely minimum food, childcare, health insurance, housing, transportation, and other basic necessities. So I thought it was a good comparison to then the median household income in Albany, which is $30.84 an hour, and then the librarian one entry-level salary at APL, which is hovering sort of between that, what you would need to support yourself or in what you would need to support yourself and one child as a single parent. So I'm going to move forward to fiscal sustainability. In order to make progress on improving salaries to keep up with inflation and the cost of living in Albany and to add much needed staff positions in the years of our strategic plan, we're going to need fiscal sustainability, and that's kind of the heart of the matter this evening. So to set the stage, I wanted to offer a picture of our actual operating costs versus revenue from tax levies over the past 8 years. And as you can see, 2022 is the anomaly where we started needing more money than we were taking in through the tax levy. The FY 2015 figure, just so you know, is slightly inflated due to the capital improvement costs that were factored into operating expenses. Any questions on this slide before I move on? Okay, just a few budget terms. Sorry, this is like a boring but important part because it comes up in the next slide. So the capital reserve is the portion of the fund balance that we use solely for funding capital improvement project costs that aren't covered by grant funding. And contributions come to the capital reserve from the fund balance by board vote on a sort of an as-needed basis. The fund balance represents the total accumulation of operating surpluses and deficits since the beginning of the library's existence. So in years where we haven't needed to spend as much, we have been able to increase the fund balance. In years where we have we've needed more than the fund balance, or excuse me, more than the tax levy provides, then we've had to take away from it. The tax cap, of course, is the state's property tax cap that limits the amount local governments and most school districts can increase the tax levy. And part of this upcoming fiscal year's story is that the 4.58% is available to us under the tax cap and wouldn't require an override, which it is a larger number, but it's because we haven't asked for as much in recent years. So this is a picture of the overall library fund balance. And it goes back to fiscal 15, and that red line that you see is the recommended minimum by the state comptroller. So the fund balance, as I just said, it represents the total accumulation of operating surpluses and deficits since the beginning of time, since the beginning of APL's school district library time anyway. And the assumptions, I want to go over some of the assumptions that were made for this fiscal year 24 projection and fiscal 25 and fiscal 24 and 25. We are assuming that we would need to contribute about 100,000 a year to capital projects to the capital reserve. We are assuming that we would need around 350,000 in fund balance. That's based on actually the 2% increase, if I'm not mistaken. Adam, can you confirm that?
Yes.
All right. So if we did not, so the projection is kind of like a worst case scenario, like if we were to keep spending as we've been spending and only ask for very modest increases, we would get close to hitting that recommended minimum of where the fund balance sinks to in a shorter amount of time. So any questions about this slide? Yeah, Sarah.
This is, it's probably very obvious to everyone but me. But the fund balance is like a pot of money that can carry over. It's not something that has to always spend, or if there's more fund balance, it can grow one year to the next.
That's right. That's right. Adam doesn't like it when I say it's like the library savings account, but it's a little bit like a savings account. The technical reasons are why he objects to that characterization, but yeah, that's essentially how it is.
Thanks.
So just looking ahead at some of the major budget factors that we're seeing, and this is no news to you, the utilities costs are increasing. So electricity, gas, water, phones, our employee benefits, which include health insurance and all the things that Adam stated a little bit earlier. Those do continue to creep up year over year. They don't go down. And as Adam stated earlier, the New York State retirement contribution or cost for us heading into fiscal 24 is 90,000 more than it was last year. So that's kind of a picture of our employee benefits and how those costs do increase slightly year over year. And it's something that we can't always predict. We try to predict as accurately as possible. Oh, sure. Yeah. So fiscal 20, that's a great question. Fiscal 20 is when we switched from the calendar fiscal year to the July 1, June 30th fiscal year. So it's that year was considered, I think, a stub year is what it's called. So that's why only 6 months shows up. Okay. So finally, I just want to share what the budget vote history looks like for the library, because it's pretty good news. Since 2013, we've only increased taxes by a total of 8.6%, which is to say that over 10 years, we've averaged an annual tax increase of just 0.86%. Since 2009, all of our tax increase proposals under the tax cap have been approved by the voters by a margin of at least 57% and as high as 81%. And that includes the overwhelming positive vote for a 4.9% increase approved in 2010. Let's see. If voters were to say yes to the maximum 4.58% under the tax cap, we would effectively reduce reliance on our fund balance, but we would not necessarily gain FY24 funds for other things, like improved staffing levels in our branches to support our current hours, like our need to decrease these safety risks and the burnout that's contributing to our retention. We also would not have funds for new staff positions to support our community programs and partnerships department, which is a department I would really like to see grow, because if we're going to achieve this great vision of community engagement through recognizing areas where we're not reaching out as much as we could be, we're going to need to grow that department. And addressing all of these needs without extra funds in fiscal 24 is going to require some creative approaches, which I'll look forward to sharing with you in a service proposal this spring. Any questions about this chart? Yeah, Sarah.
Fiscal year 2012. Was that really a 25% increase?
That was what was proposed initially, yes. That was actually post-construction and when we realized that we hadn't really factored in as many dollars for increased staffing as we would need. That's my understanding of the situation in a nutshell.
And so just to make sure the chart is clear, that budget failed narrowly.
Mhm.
And then the library was forced to hold another vote where they went with a 15%, which narrowly passed.
And I'm sorry that these are probably like really obvious questions. When we talk about the budget limits that are, the most we can ask for, like asking for 25% more seems like a lot to me. And in that, and I know that that's the past, I'm just trying to get my bearings.
Yeah, so that was a huge override. I mean, it came with a giant campaign and I wasn't here in Albany to see it, but I've heard a lot about it. Go ahead, Sarah.
So when we were talking in the beginning of the meeting and Bob was explaining all of the override and the resolution, this is an example of that.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I don't know if it was that year, I don't think, actually, that was back for that year, but it
Oh,
would be now. Okay.
yeah, sure.
Therefore, going back to the community relations, we have to act the voters if they're going to go on board. So that outreach, does that include the community relations when you're going to act that the 4.9, even though it is a small amount, $11.96, but still we went up last year, and everybody's feeling it with $7.89. So, even a little bit would be, that's for 18, but a little bit would still be, a lot to the act when everybody's feeling it in their pocket. So that community relations piece, doesn't, how do you export that in the other categories when you're going out? I don't know, I think everything is soon like that, so you might not have to go to different meetings or different to, make a case that you want to go up and to support your library.
So if I'm understanding your question, are you referring back to that line that we were talking about earlier?
Right. So, I mean, does that include, like, if someone has to go out, over, if the mostly, community meetings are after things or whatever, maybe the library is at home, so this include overtime?
No, no, that community relations line does not include or support any of what we would be doing to actually sell the budget to the community. And we could easily just reinstate that line, like it's not if it's an optics thing, I'm happy to reinstate that line. Because
no, I just want to know how it's going to be treated, or what category is falls under that outreach to the community, trying to persuade or get them to support new the tax levy. So I mean, where does that come in?
So, I mean, my question, which is kind of perceived that one, is like, how much does the library expect to spend, like, informing the community about this year's budget? Like hundreds of dollars, or?
Yeah, I would put that on. I mean, I'm basically the one going with heads of branches to various neighborhood association meetings with a PowerPoint, not this one, but a different one, a community report, and a PowerPoint that describes our community, our strategic plan goals as they relate to the community. So that's just my staff, my time and my staff's time. And we rearrange schedules to support that. So I would never have to say no on the basis of cost to any community engagement meetings.
The role of Andrea and the staff and us is to explain the budget, what it's going to, what it entails, to make people informed and make it transparent. Something like the Friends group, they put in some money to encourage people to vote yes.
That's my understanding, yes.
No, I don't see it all of it. Trying to figure out where. I know that with the doors as well, or how that works.
Absolutely.
But to piggyback off of that, right, so that's our role, so I'm standing in front of someone, and I just got to make it relatable for me. So I'm standing in front of you, and I'm saying, you know, this is how much we're looking to increase our budget, and these are the reasons why we need additional staffing, but you're the general public, and you're gonna say, how does staffing affect things, what does that mean? You're gonna say, what does retirement do for me? What does, you know, publicity? No, not that one. What does, so that's what I'm saying. I think that the pieces that are going to increase that affect that 4.9 or 4.89% is not gonna really matter to the public. We need to, there has to be something that is tangible that they can say, this is what the library is doing to service the community, which will enable me to support that increase. I mean, and I get it, like $11 might not seem a lot, but if you're paying an extra 70 cents in gas, you're paying $5 for a dozen of eggs, you're paying extra money for milk, $11 becomes a lot, you know, for a family that's, you know, and I'm just talking about working for,
Yeah.
not even people that don't have, it's about people that have a viable home with more than one working parent and kids. $11 becomes a lot, and I'm not saying we don't need it and we don't need the full-time, the higher, the increase in salaries and things like that. I'm just asking a question. What is it that we can say to voters that enables them to support this? What service can we point to say, this is what specifically speaks to you? Because books, periodicals, all of that staying the same. Digital content is staying the same. Like, it looks like the forward-facing things are staying the same.
That's exactly, can I speak to that? Absolutely. That's exactly right. This is not an easy sell by any stretch of the imagination. It's like we're saying, we're in fiscal trouble and we really need to shore up our financial situation for the long term so that we're not headed for an override in, like a forced override, basically, in like 6 years' time or 4 years' time or 5 years' time. So it's sort of like, it's a step toward the fiscal sustainability goal, which is arguably like the, you know, it's the toughest goal to sell, but what it does for the library in the long term is put us in a stronger position to make sustainable growth happen. That said, we're not in a great position in terms of our workforce, as the presentation shared. I mean, we have challenges in the near term that we need to address in these creative ways, and that's kind of the big task ahead.
I just have a question, that I think definitely advocate for an increase. I would need to understand why that increase is happening and agree with it to be out anywhere advocating for taxpayers and money. So even if it's a decision I'm not okay with, I'm not going to advocate for something I don't agree with, right? So when you said previously that for 24, FY 24, right, with the employment, it's not even meeting our goal. If this budget would be this 4.8% is not even going to meet our goal. So is that at current staffing levels, and is that including an increase in wages, or is that a projection that we have more staff to fulfill? Which one is
No. really all the 4.58% increase gets us is more time away from a core supervisor. So it doesn't actually give us money for extra staff. It doesn't give us, it gives us better financial position for the future.
So when we're just speaking specifically about staffing, right? Because I can go out and advocate all day. If I say, I know our biggest issue here is staffing. Our biggest issue here is employment, right? And I know we're gonna be able to, with this budget, even if we ask for 10% right now, right? We can put 10% on the table. I know it's gonna solve the library staffing problem, where we will have the staff that we need to provide the services we need. I have no problem getting behind it. But this is the same issue that happened with the budget previously. You're telling me to ask the taxpayers for more money, and it's still not even gonna address the anywhere near the staffing concerns that we have. Why are we asking for money? What is the real life plan, tangible plan that we're trying to sell in reference to staffing? So like I said, is this number reflective of, we have 10 staff and those same 10 staff got a wage increase, and that's why the money is more in the staffing column? Or did we get 10 staff and then we get another additional 5 staff, and that's why it's more? What are we talking about here in reference to just the staffing piece of it, if that's our biggest, one of our biggest issues?
So the 4.58% doesn't address money for more staff. So our current level of staff is all we can support within this budget that's in front of you. The problems related to our staffing situation are beyond what we can do with a budget increase short of probably 20%. Because we've done a lot of internal discussion around what it would take to properly staff our building across the library system in a way that would allow for an off-desk and on-desk time, meaning time for public service, direct public service, time away for programming planning, for collection development, for training.
Okay, so I get that we have other budget items, right? But when we're speaking specifically about staffing, right? It's like, I want to get us closer to a resolution. So it seems like every budget, we're behind the ball because we're not asking for anywhere near enough to address the staffing issues that we have. So let's say we need to go up 10% so that we can get an additional, if we can't raise salaries, we can provide an additional 10 more staff members to help with that staffing issue. Because then when 24 comes around and we're doing the next budget, we're gonna be asking for another tax increase to still be behind we're still at a really big deficit for the staffing that we need to operate. So that's my concern. We keep on asking for more money. It doesn't seem like transparent. It seems like we keep moving the goalposts. Like, okay, we're gonna ask you for this. It's a little bit more than we need. It's not exactly what we need, but just right now, okay, and then next year, okay, we need more money. It doesn't seem, just let's ask for what we need to get it. Let's get somewhere closer to what we need. Why are we undercutting ourselves? It doesn't seem transparent. It doesn't seem like a.
I mean, that would require an override. Like, to actually get to the staffing level that we would need and address the salary. Like right now, what we're talking about is, and I agree, like, it's really, it seems sometimes as though there isn't like a long-term plan, but what we're trying to say tonight is that this is part of a long-term plan. We can't not ask for small or not so small increases under the tax cap every year. And in fact, I would argue that it's a mistake to not ask for a tax increase every year because of inflation going up, because of the cost of living
Okay,
going
so
up.
I get that part,
Over
right?
time.
So I get inflation, I get that part. I'm speaking specifically about one of our major issues that this board has been dealing with, this library has been dealing with for years, is that the civil service issue is a mess. We need to figure out a plan, a tangible plan that can get around the civil service issue. So if that is bringing on more staff to accommodate and alleviate some of these pressures that we feel, that's the plan. We're still gonna have to do this, go the same route with civil service as we can, but while that's going on, we have staff leaving, we have high turnover. Why, if we need to ask for a substantial amount of money, if I'm gonna advocate for an increase, let's get a real increase. Let's get a real increase that we can see a tangible difference and not deal with some of the same issues that we have. Why, if we're gonna be advocating for the increase anyway, let's address a major problem.
What is it?
No, I'm saying the money, like how far.
What's the max? This is the maximum, 4.58%, this is the number of assessments, a zillion times in the last couple months. Yeah, that is the maximum.
So if we're out front saying we want to address, care about our staff, we want to address the staffing issue, we see it as a big issue in the library, we've been dealing with it for years. Let's get behind our library, let's fix this, let's try to make a major impact on the staffing issue. That's something we can advocate for, that's a good reason to ask for more money.
I mean, I love everything you're saying, just that I was taking a more cautious approach simply because it is a lot to ask of taxpayers, and we don't even know what the salary increases are gonna be for the new contract. So it's like, that would be
That's the
a,
same thing you get for, it's like the.
Jerry, that was a discussion we did have in the, finance committee. And what Andrea said earlier, that everything is going up. And the $11 would be a burden on many of the applicants. So we were feeling that, and if we, in a meeting months ago, I said, let's ask for what we need. And when I heard the amount and the impact it would have on everyone, would you be able to get behind that?
I would be able to get behind having resolution to somewhat satisfy our problem, even if that includes cutting other budget items and moving money around. Like some of these things maybe we can create, and this is, I would say, even previously we were discussing the budget before. We can put our heads together and be a bit more creative with funneling more money into the staffing issue as opposed to maybe some of the other things we have here. Because if the mindset is, okay, we don't want to go above the cap, that's fine. Well, what can we do to be a little bit more creative to move money around to get more money into the staffing?
Without dipping
Without going
deeply.
above the 4.58.
and not dipping into our rapidly shrinking fund balance.
well, we would have to do this too, our fund balance. Wait, I'm sorry, the scenario is,
Saying is, it also, part of the juggling act is that there's a finite fund balance. And we can't say, let's take $500,000 out of the fund balance. Because that's not being fiscally responsible.
If you don't want to put a burden on taxpayers, no one wants to put a burden on taxpayers. We have a fund balance for a reason. At times, you do have to utilize your fund balance. Am I saying that it's the fund balance? No, I'm not, but if we need to take more out to maybe accommodate the fact that we don't want to burden our taxpayers, that's what a fund balance is for. But the purpose of having a fund balance is we cannot use it. I'm not asking us to deplete it, but we have to be, I think it's our responsibility to be a bit creative in reference to how to solve our issues. You can only have one or the other. You don't want to burden taxpayers, I get it. What else can we do to try and solve our problems? We're gonna keep on being in the same situation every year.
well, that's, I mean, yeah, I hear you. I mean, I think that this is a very frustrating position to be in because the staffing problem is a complex one. As you said, civil service always has to share. We're actually making progress with civil service, which is really great. One of the things that we're working on is promotional track within the library so that you can go from being a clerk to an LA to a librarian and, not as
What's the fund balance
difficult.
now right now?
The fund balance is at 2 points.
Do you have a slide about the fund balance?
Oh, I thought your presentation was over. It's not over, it's still going on?
No, it's over, but I can go back to the slide that shows the fund balance, but it would, I would just have
I
to
think we
share.
should talk more about the fund balance.
Actually, wait, just remembered, I printed out all of the. Here. Now we can still,
Can I ask a question?
yeah,
All right, so in these two scenarios we're, floating right now. One where we would say like, let's go over tax cap and ask like for what we want versus 4.58. Say we ask for the override and the override fails. Does that mean that we get to go to a revote for a possibly different number or we're out for that year?
No, you revert back to what we have one more.
Yeah, you can go for a revote, or we can take with the current level.
I just didn't know how the revote works. It's like.
Very accelerated.
Very well.
Accelerated, it would be, or about the third Tuesday. So we have done enough. To make that up, so.
And I believe we actually have to pay $50,000 to conduct it.
Yep.
Right, it costs money and it also draws a lot of negative publicity to the library.
That's what we have out of the fund balance.
An operating.
Right, I think that's important too, right? It's like, okay, so you say, like, right, like we recommend the fund balance is here to dip into, but like if you start dipping into it 1 year, presumably to meet that new cost you have or whatever you're supporting that amounts, you're gonna have after that again. As the number's going down, we're still asking for more, there's a tipping point where we cross the comptroller's red line. And that's problematic.
That's when we keep on going into it. I mean,
But that's what I'm saying is like,
Yeah.
right, if we say that we need to tip in like, 20,000 this year to make a change, then we have to keep doing that 20,000 to sustain whatever money we're putting into the, improvement of that.
But I'm not suggesting going into the fund balance and put it into staffing and don't change any other item.
Right, yeah, I remember you were acknowledged there.
Yeah, you will be shifting things around, so you're not gonna, the hope is to use the fund balance as a route to get somewhere close to where we need to come up with a better plan for next.
There's not a lot of extra in the budget, it's really obscure budget.
Absolutely, but we're still at a point where we have issues that need to be solved, so we can say that we're bootstrapped and, this is the, issue that we have, we still have to come up with, we should come up with some type of resolution if we're dealing with the problem isn't gonna change, it's only gonna get worse, so are we gonna ask for more money or that we need to get somewhere closer to what we need, are we gonna rearrange some budget items, are we gonna come up with a little bit different strategy with some of the things here on this budget, or what are we gonna do to tangibly like affect our problem? So this is the same conversation.
The attrition problem, again, goes to a number of different problems, right? The safety concerns that staff have, the non-competitive salaries, and the high turnover and staffing issues. Part of what we've been talking about internally is the fact that, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, and it is kind of in the weeds, but it's very relevant to our retention. Is this concept of desk time and what we're doing when workers are in the library, right? Like in a healthy desk model, you've got a portion of your time on desk and a portion of your time off desk. The off desk time is used for training, for program planning and development, for outreach. Right now, we're at such a minimal staffing level across the branches that we don't actually have a lot of capacity within our staff model. So we're struggling to actually do our jobs, right, as librarians and as library assistants. We're spending a lot of time training, well, we're barely training new people on the job. The turnover is such that, again, this like staff training element is impacted, so people are being put on desks before they're necessarily trained up in the areas of de-escalation and so forth. All of that kind of combines to create a healthy, like making improvements to all of that creates a healthy network of staff within each branch. So that when someone calls out, we don't have to cancel a program, or when someone calls out, we don't have a situation where someone's on desk for 7 hours. So what we have to do, and to your point, the creativity comes into our service model. So even raising the 4.58%, it doesn't address the service model. The service model is what's going to help us re-envision library services for the community that are more sustainable and that can support a healthy workforce. And that's what I'm excited about, but I'm also, feeling nervous about the fact that, yeah, this is a large amount of the tax cap to ask for when you're not able to say anything much more than this puts the library in a stronger financial position. I mean, every organization in town has been suffering over the utility costs that are increasing, over workforce challenges, like, we are so not alone that I think that the voting public who come out to the library vote, I mean, I would be surprised if they necessarily batted an eye at this increase, just because of inflation, because of all the numbers that everyone sees in the media.
It's like we're saying two different things. So either it just very simple, we either ask for more money or we don't. We can't make everybody happy. We can't accommodate everything. So we need to, of course, we need to retain the employees we have. We will hope to be able to bring more employees on. So maybe we might need to be creative and cut some of the programming. That's a reasonable step if you or the public do not want to pay more money. That's, I mean, it's only logical. Does anyone want to do that? No, no one wants to do it. I'm just saying, something has to give. We can't be spread so thin and then still not addressing the issues. Like, we're being spread thin, but still, we're just scraping by. So maybe we need to pull something back to be able to reset and to be a healthy ecosystem, because to me, year after year, this does not seem like a healthy ecosystem.
You said it very well.
It's unrealistic. It's just very unrealistic to.
From where I think that, definitely something's gonna have to give at some point.
Yeah, like,
well, one
let's
thing
reflect
we're-
it.
I don't know.
One thing we're looking at,
Not enough resources for all of us. I hear.
right, so one of the things we have to look at is hours. That's gonna be a difficult conversation, and again, the community is gonna feel that, but we need to make some difficult decisions and make some creative but drastic changes if we're gonna create this healthy environment or make progress, I should say, to a healthier staffing model before we have the resources to really
But
solve
that's
the
what the
problem.
issue kind of I have, because we asked for the money without a plan. Let's get the hours that we're gonna cover. The hard decisions, let's make those hard decisions, work them into the budget, and that way, that's how you have a tangible idea. And I ask for the money, and then we have to figure out what hard decisions we have to make that time. No, let's figure out if we need to cut hours, let's figure out the hours. And that's gonna be a part of us advocating for this money. Hey, guys, we have to cut these hours, but we don't wanna ask you guys for more money. So this is what we have to do to be able to accommodate everybody. Like, why are we making decisions after the fact? So,
We were really limited to hours.
I'm just, whatever whatever those plans is already.
Aren't some other branches already limited to hours, like, I think that's up until 12 to 5 or 12 to 6. I think it's already limited amount of hours that are something.
So for a long time, we've been beholden to this rule about the central library and central library hours. And this is one of the shifting pieces that we can look at for fiscal 24, because the rules have changed about library central hours. As you know, Washington Ave is the central library branch. In the olden days, the idea was that people needed access to the physical collections that the central library funds supported, but of course, all the central library funds now support the digital collections that are available 24/7. So the rule about 55 hours a week at the central library has changed. Now, within the whole system, we have to support at least 55 hours a week. This gives us the opportunity to reallocate hours places where we might need to ramp them up a little bit, places where we could consolidate efforts a little bit more and offer a better programming model with concentrated services at a given branch. So these are all conversations that we're having, internally, of course, at first, and that I'm hoping to put together into a proposal that speaks to our staffing challenges and that gives the community an idea of what we're trying to do. This is correct. And if we have, weekend hours are a great place to start looking, because it's a highly trafficked, I mean, working families go to the library on the weekend. But if we're able to open multiple locations from 10 to 5, what more would that do for for people who are seeking library programs to do with their families on? So that's one of the things that we're absolutely, it's on the table, we're trying to really loosen up what our preconceptions have been about what we need to do, what the level of service is, and provide more with less, essentially, with not as much as we need. Yeah. So yeah, the big question is, can the community stomach a 4.58% increase under the tax cap, and also a service plan that changes the library's makeup of hours potentially, but that stands to offer more programs at more on-demand time, and provide the staff with some relief from this constant on-desk thing that we have going on right now that contributes to their attrition.
This person does this program, does not necessarily mean you have to do it in-house. You can get that organization to come in.
Yeah, and we do that really, really well here. I think that, some recent examples have been a little sad, like the Caddis example where they were coming in to provide service, and I believe because they had safety concerns, and part of that went to their staff because they could only afford to send one person to support that service. So again, goes back to we are not alone. APL is not alone, but we're trying to do an awful lot alone sometimes. Because of all these other social services agencies that are suffering for, feeling the effects of the pandemic and great resignation.
Is there a grants? Is there a grant position? Is there an employee that would be able to look at grants and research grants and possibly get grants?
Right now, the relationship between the library and FFAPL kind of provides for that type of granting, like seeking grant opportunities, but I am very interested in having a position within the library to seek those out. We are always looking at what's available. I mean, I get all the lists, I get all the grant information, and we're always chasing down opportunities where we can, but some grants actually demand even more staff time than it's worth it. So yeah, we've got this 4.58% under the tax cap that would basically keep the library a little bit more financially stable for longer, or we go for the 2%. But in either scenario, we're not really able to ramp up staffing or do all the things. We're still needing to be creative and resourceful within the amount that we have under that tax cap.
And that 4.58 is the largest amount within the
That's right.
And I think, you had a comment before, right, where like the tax cap could significantly decrease, right? So like, it's like, yeah. So like, that's another thing, that we don't have to elect for an override necessarily, but the benefit from a fairly high cap.
And it's not a guarantee that this is available next year.
So I'm confused, right? So even if you do 1.58%, and the condition is we're still not, like, why are we not actively, so it's our question, building that into the budget, a reference to cut hours or whatever we can do to help you, in reference to different.
So in any scenario where we're asking for something under the tax cap, we're still going to need to be creative and look at all of the things you're talking about, hours and services, and that follows. Like this is the first decision that needs to be made, and the service plan is going to have to be. And we're already thinking about that service plan even now. It's just that we needed to get the budget presentation together for you before the next step, which is that service proposal.
Thank you, Jarvis, for bringing this up.
it's a recognition that we're in a difficult position. We're in a tough spot with this financial picture of the libraries. I mean, I've been thinking about how this is not an easy sell for a long time, and yeah, it's the right thing to do in the sense that we don't know when the opportunity is going to come again. The voting public, the people who actually, you know, come out for the school budget and the library budget, they've been overwhelmingly supportive in the last, you know, however many years we saw the voting history. So I hesitate to say that I'm confident. I mean, I'm a newcomer still, but just looking at the data, it gives me confidence.
I mean, yeah, it's unfortunate that, like, we can't do more with every budget. And if there wasn't 10% inflation and all the conference talking about it, maybe we can do more with 4.58%. But I do think the financial aspect of holding the line and keeping our fund balance healthy for several more years by doing this budget puts us in a very good position to keep making good decisions and keep improving our ability to improve staffing in the future, improve things to improve in the future. It's not very exciting, but it is a good idea.
Thank you. Thank you.
What happens now? Well,
We're not voting.
Pardon? What happens next meeting? So, like, do we come in and have more discussion and vote? Do we just come in and yay, nay? Is there a standard process?
Yes. So we next meeting, we plan to have motions introduced to pass the budget as this form, the tax levy, separate motion. The tax levy is just the number 7.7 million. And the tax cap override that Bob described at the beginning. Those three things together make up our budget meeting, our pre-budget things. So we should do all three at the next meeting, and yes, we can discuss more at the next meeting as well. Is that what this is about?
Yeah, yeah, I was just wondering about
if I can answer any additional questions in the intervening time between now and the next meeting, the budget vote, I'm happy to do so. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you. Thank you for. Hi.
Do you need a motion to adjourn?
Yeah, if there are no more questions, that is the motion to adjourn.
I have a question, sorry.
Yes, no, of course.
Procedural. So are we skipping executive session, public comment two? Are we skipping all?
Oh, sorry. Has there been any quick comment during the meeting?
there is not really a public.
All right. And we have no need for executive session, right? Thank you. Now we can take a motion to adjourn. Right. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. You.